So for reference, this video was initially made to be a speech in front of a class to educate on a syndrome that a lot of people have not heard of. So please excuse the physicality of this and enjoy. I hope you learned something. I will let you know if there's anything that you're missing. So let's go ahead and get started. By a show of hands, who here knows someone with Waardenburg Syndrome? In the room where I delivered this speech, no one raised their hand. And I followed up with, yeah, that's what I expected. So let's talk about the unique universe of Waardenburg Syndrome. You may be wondering, why do I care? It's a world of vast things and differences, as well as you probably haven't heard of this disorder. I mean, shit, only 1 in 40,000 people have it. And since you probably don't know too much about it, it's not gonna hurt to educate yourself. So to assist me, I have the CDCP's website, Medline Plus, Steph Sanyati, a trans woman who has Waardenburg Syndrome, as well as me. I also have this disorder. Welcome to Waardenburg Syndrome. Today we're going to be talking about its risks, who has it, and what it feels like to have this disorder, as well as other topics. So who has this disorder? It can be inherited. It's an autosomal dominant disorder, meaning that if one of your parents has it, then you are likely to have it. And autosomal means that it isn't connected to your gametes, aka sex chromosome. It's not a sex-linked thing. Or a gene can mutate and create this disorder. What is Waardenburg Syndrome? I'm so glad you asked. It's a group of genetic conditions that can cause hearing loss, changes in pigmentations of hair, skin, and eyes.
But Waardenburg Syndrome is not a disease, okay? It is not a disease.
So where does Waardenburg Syndrome occur? Your DNA. You're genetically different from the average human being. Your skin tone, hair color, eye color, ears, because of any loss of hearing that you may experience. My personal experience with the loss of hearing thing, deafness runs in my family. Cochlear deafness is the most common form of deafness in people with Waardenburg Syndrome. And with that being said, it's like you grow up knowing that one of these days you're most likely going to be deaf, especially if it runs in your family like it does in mine. And since it runs in my family, it was more of a concern. You feel so distanced and out of everything. Like you don't know what's going on a lot of the time, and this is followed up by Steph Sanyati in her video.
It doesn't affect my life too much. The only time when it really impairs me is in like large open classrooms. For example, during high school I had quite a bit of trouble with that, but I made it work. Gymnasiums, there's too much echoing happening. In large crowded restaurants or bars or clubs, I don't enjoy myself because I don't know what is happening at all. There's so much background noise, and it's like, imagine if every sound you ever hear is coming at you right here, and it's all right here. That's every day. So if I'm in a large crowded bar, I don't know who's saying what, where it's coming from. I have no idea what's happening. So those situations make me really anxious and panicky because I feel like I have no control over what's happening because I don't know what is happening.
I have gotten made fun of because of my physical characteristics before. I do look different than most average humans. Looking different, of course it's difficult to children and people who aren't used to things outside of their bubble to understand, but that doesn't mean that you should make fun of someone because of a physical difference. Like, a physical difference isn't something that you can help, and people need to realize that. Here's a quote from Steph Sanyati. She says, "The first step in finding a place of confidence with your differences is acknowledging and understanding that you are not the only one with that difference." So when is this diagnosed? Most of the time it's diagnosed at birth or early childhood. It's rarely diagnosed at later dates, but it definitely can be diagnosed at a later date. So why does it happen? A mutation in any of these genes. PAX3 gene, MITF gene, SNAI2 gene, SOX10 gene, EDN3 gene, EDNRB gene, and I just listed off a fuck ton of shit that a lot of people won't understand, so here's an explanation. PAX3 directs other genes' activity. It says where to go, and then those genes follow. MITF makes melanin. Waardenburg Syndrome is a form of albinism. SNAI2 is a breast cancer, leukemia, and cell glue gene, so people with Waardenburg Syndrome are more common to get breast cancer, leukemia, and have cell issues. SOX10 gene, formation of tissues and organs, that's also a thing that some people with Waardenburg Syndrome struggle with, most often in type 4, but we'll get to the types in a moment. EDN3 is stimulation of cell growth and division, so some people with Waardenburg Syndrome have issues with cells, as we mentioned, but specifically growth and division of those cells. So, and EDNRB is a blood pressure, blood vessel gene that just affects the blood pressure and blood vessels. Waardenburg Syndrome does often lead to blood pressure issues. Signs and symptoms of Waardenburg Syndrome include premature graying of the hair, some form of cochlear deafness, wide bridge of the nose, differences in pigments such as 2 different colored eyes, white eyelashes, and chunk of white hair in the front. That's called a forelock. And there are at least 4 types of this disorder that are categorized and recognized. Type 1 is characterized by eyes that appear widely spaced, congenital hearing loss, patchy pigment disturbances of the iris, hair, and skin. Mutations in the PAX3 gene cause the symptoms observed in this condition. Treatment is symptomatic and supportive. In type 2, we have varying degrees of deafness, pigmentation abnormalities of the eyes, hair, skin, and it differs from type 1 and some other types of Waardenburg syndrome by the absence of dystopia canthorum, which is the increased distance between the inner corners of the eyelids. Type 3 is a very rare subtype of Waardenburg syndrome, characterized by limb abnormalities, congenital hearing loss, and minor defects in structures arising from the neural crest, which is epidermis development. Pigmentation abnormalities of the eyes, hair, and skin as per usual. Type 4 includes hearing loss, changes in pigmentation of the hair, skin, and eyes, and Hirschsprung disease, an intestinal disorder. The diagnosis of Waardenburg syndrome is a doctor observing clinical features, blood tests, tests of hearing, sight, and other things, sometimes even CT scans. So treatments for Waardenburg syndrome: cochlear implants, hearing aids, developmental support for those who are behind in development, whether that be physical or like a learning disorder. Special schools are made out there for children with severe hearing loss. There are surgeries to prevent or remove blockages in the intestines for those with Hirschsprung disease, but there is no cure. My experience with Waardenburg syndrome: I was tested and diagnosed at 4 months old. I was an itty-bitty baby. Both of my parents had it, so we expected this. I've had many CT scans to prove the function of my brain just because of some personal things, but we don't have to talk about that. I've had blood tests. My most recent CT scan, I believe, was in January. My next CT scan, we don't have one right now. Everything's been appearing pretty well, and it's been very regular, but my doctor said that he'll call me whenever I'm due for one, which is every year or so, maybe every 2 years, just depending. CT scan, not exactly normal for people with Waardenburg syndrome. I did inherit this disorder though. My mother has type 1, my father has type 3, I have type 2. Waardenburg syndrome is a beautiful disorder in the sense of it's something that differs me from the crowd. And it's not exactly a, oh, I want to be different, or, oh, I want to be normal. It's just part of who I am. So you can't really take that and say that it doesn't exist, because if you don't, then you're not acknowledging a very important part of yourself that does divert you from the average human. With that being said,
oh, you look normal. The problem that I have with this statement, it assumes that I need to adhere to the standard of normal. When you say, oh, you look normal, it implies that I need to fit a normal, and that's not cute. That's not true. None of us should have to fit a box to be considered beautiful.
I've had this my whole life. I've known since a wee babe that I have Waardenburg Syndrome. When you grow up knowing that something is different, you're kind of acclimated to that, and you don't really understand that until you get in school or exposed to the outward world where not everybody's different and not everybody is visibly different. Awareness for Waardenburg Syndrome is very important because little kids need to be able to look at a screen and see somebody who looks like themselves, because I never had that growing up. I definitely was taught that I looked different, and that was completely normal for me. But the second you get to a place where you're not used to seeing people that look like you, and you get made fun of for looking like that, it's kind of important to have a person to look up to that has the same disorder as you. This disorder has only affected my life in the sense of I look different and my hearing is shit. So it hasn't really affected me heavily other than the CT scans and, the diagnosis and treatment aspects. But that's just part of living life with a difference. Moral of the story, whether or not you think something is important, there's someone out there who struggles and lives their life going through something. And that can vary from person to person, from thing to thing. Whether or not you believe or understand is not exactly important. You just need to hear the person out and just take a step back and realize that you are not the biggest thing in this universe. There are people who matter, who are important. Also, don't point out that people have something quote-unquote wrong with them. That's not cool, nor is it funny or anything like that, because a physical difference can't be helped, nor can a neurological difference or anything like that. Just don't be an asshole, and I don't think that needs to be said, but people are assholes, unfortunately.
Your differences make you important and special. What is different about you is most certainly integral to who you are as a person. So do not tone it down for anybody. Do not hide it for anybody. You be you. Be yourself. Rock and roll.
Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed. And peace out, my fellow Rainers.